I was suspicious of the way Black teachers were represented in traditional archival sources, because I'm like, these are records that are reflecting how they're projecting themselves to white school authorities. I can't trust that because I've seen how Black people navigate power and institutions in particular ways, in part because I was a student of Black teachers my entire life, right? And so this is when I was, I don't talk about my own experience in fugitive pedagogy, but when I was reviewing the manuscript, and actually Josh's kind of dissertation advisor, Imani Perry, who's now a good friend of mine, read the manuscript, and we've become good friends over the years too, which is also just interesting thinking about that like story of friendship there. She was like, don't underestimate your experience and how it informs how you look in the historical record and how you name absences because of what you know as a Black person who's navigated these kinds of contexts.
Good evening, everyone. Let us get started. My name is Christian Walks, and I am the Director of Education and Interpretation here at the Museum of African American History in Boston and Nantucket. It is my honor to welcome you all to this evening's featured event on Friendship in Black Study, a celebration of 2 new books on education, friendship, and Black life. Without further ado, I would like to hand it over to my dear friend and colleague, Zenzele Riddick, who will offer a note on tonight's theme on friendship and Black study. Zenzele?
Right. Good evening, everybody. I knew y'all was gonna do it. We in church. Thank you, Christian, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Zenzele Riddick, and I am a current PhD student at Harvard, along with Christian, and we are both advisees of Dr. Jarvis Givens. Before we begin, I want to say a few short words about the way that Jarvis and Dr. Josh Bennett have modeled scholarship and friendship in a way that left a deep impact on Christian and I. In the fall of 2019, Jarvis taught a PhD seminar called Black Studies in Education Research. It was in this course that Jarvis first introduced us to the concept of school clothes. And it was also in this course that I was first introduced to the work of Josh, who was an enthusiastic and inspiring guest speaker in one of our first sessions. It was also in this course that I first met the moderator for this evening's discussion and the person who would become my closest scholar friend, Christian Walks. In the image behind me, you can see all of us together on the day that Dr. Bennett made his visit, with Chris and I front and center. For me, the day was memorable, not only because of the enlightening scholarly conversations that we had, but especially because I had a chance to witness in real time the friendship between our 2 authors. Having been a very young graduate student, always extra excited and extremely nervous, I'll never forget the warmth and the comfort that was ushered into that room by Dr. Bennett's smile and enveloping presence, and the laughter that Jarvis and Josh shared, and the banter coupled with deep and enlightening conversation. In their friendship, I got to see my advisor in an entirely new light. In fact, I saw myself a bit differently too. I was able to breathe a bit easier, and I was able to see that scholarly productivity, true friendship, and true joy could all be one and the same. In that moment, they modeled something for me, and shortly thereafter, I took that model to heart and struck up an almost indescribable friendship, grounded in scholarship, with Christian Walks. Christian is never afraid to ask critical questions. He pushes me to defend, justify, and improve upon my ideas, and he does so with love. We teach together, we read together, we write together, and we lead together. So it is with a very, very special sense of appreciation that I thank our authors, our sponsors, and our moderator for putting this event together tonight. To close, I would like to quote Dr. Givens in the acknowledgement of school clothes. Jarvis writes that, gathering with friends to talk about our ideas in life and the relationship between the two is always a generative experience for me. I usually leave feeling better than when I arrived, with more light, more clarity, and feeling more compelled to get the work done. Friendship for me has made the work collaborative and less isolating. With that, I will pass the mic to Diamond Arrington, who is here to represent the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Black Student Union, to introduce our authors.
Hello, everybody. I'm a little tall, so we're just gonna make this as tall as we can make it. Thank you, Zenzele, for that wonderful friendship talk. So I'm gonna just introduce our wonderful authors and speakers today. Oh, next slide. There we go. Oh, wrong person. There we go. Jarvis Givens is a professor of education and African American studies at the Harvard University. He is the author of 2 books, School Clothes, a collective memoir of Black student witness, and Fugitive Pedagogy, Carter G. Woodson and the Art of Black Teaching, which won several book awards, including the History of Education Society's 2022 Outstanding Book Award and the American Educational Research Association 2022 Outstanding Book Award, and the 2022 Book Award from the Association of the Study of African American Life and History. Professor Givens recently prepared new editions of 2 African American classics, Carter G. Woodson's The Miseducation of the Negro, published by Penguin Classics, and Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, to be published by the Northern Library. In partnership with Imani Perry from Princeton University, he is also the principal investigator of the Black Teacher Archive, my apologies, a digital humanities project sponsored by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation and focused on preserving the political and intellectual legacy of Black school teachers before 1970. His research has been published in journals and magazines including The Atlantic, the Boston Globe, American Educational Research Journal, SOS, and Harvard Educational Review. Professor Givens earned his PhD in African American Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. He is a native of Compton, California, and currently resides in Roxbury, Mass. Let's give Dr. Givens a huge round of applause. Now, Joshua Bennett is a professor of English and creative writing at Dartmouth. He is the author of 5 books of poetry, criticism, and narrative nonfiction. The Sobbing School, Penguin 2016, winner of the National Poetry Series and finalist of the NAACP Image Award, Ode, a finalist for the New England Book Award, Being Property Once Myself, winner of the MLA's William Sanders Scarborough Prize, The Study of Human Life, which is currently being adapted for television in partnership with the Warner Brothers Studios, and Spoken Word, A Cultural History. Bennett earned his PhD in English from Princeton University and an MA in Theater and Performance Studies from the University of Warwick, which he was a Marshall Scholar. He has recited his original works at the Sundance Film Festival, the NAACP Image Awards, and President Obama's Evening of Poetry and Music at the White House. He has also performed and taught creative writing workshops at hundreds of middle schools, high schools, colleges, and universities across the United States, as well as in the UK and South Africa. From his creative writing and scholarship, Joshua has received fellowships and awards from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Whitening Foundation, the National Endowment of the Arts, MIT, and the Society of Fellows at Harvard University. Alongside his friend and colleague, Jesse McCarthy, he is the founding editor of Minor Notes, a Penguin Classic book series dedicated to minor poets within the Black expressive tradition. He currently lives in Mass. Let's give him a round of applause. I'm gonna ask our authors to come and take their places along with our moderator.
My boy, let's get it.
And I want you all just to sit back and relax and just soak up all the knowledge that we're about to receive. One more time, let's give it up for Dr. Jarvis Givens and Dr. Joshua Bennett.
Mic check, mic check.
1 2 1 2.
Good evening, everyone. At this portion of the event, we'll get started with the conversation, the marquee conversation between our authors and their new publications that came out this year. To start off this dialogue on their friendship and scholarship, I would like to begin with the question that I'll open up for dialogue between the both of them. So tonight's event, titled On Friendship in Black Study, is in honor of your friendship as leading thinkers on Black life and culture, but also to celebrate your two new books, School Clothes and Spoken Word. Before we talk about the specifics of these texts, I want to start with the theme. For our audience, can you discuss what Black study is and why friendship is significant?
I can start.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, how's everyone doing tonight? Y'all all right? This is amazing. I've been in New Hampshire for the past 4 years, just seeing this many Black folks in a room. It's like lifting my whole month. Yeah, I mean, I came to Black Studies in large part because of my friends, right? So my undergraduate training was in the Africana Studies department at the University of Pennsylvania. And for those of you who don't know, there's actually a summer program. We have a summer institute for Black Studies at Penn. So I was a 17-year-old boy reading Cornell West Race Matters, and I got a letter in the mail saying I could do Africana Studies as a summer program. Started, so I said, look, I get to be on a college campus, sign me up, right? Gets me out of my parents' house a month early. And when I got there, I was astonished. You know, we had seminars on Black history, on Black music, on Brazilian literature. I mean, I also discovered a sense through Africana Studies that Black people were everywhere. You know, my mom was the first person in my family to go to college, and she's an accountant, right? So I wasn't necessarily steeped in the idea that you could even go to a university and go into Black studies, think about the African diaspora critically. So it was the first place I made friends. They let us take naps in the department, and they really just welcomed us as if we were kin. And then when I got here to cold Massachusetts, you know, sleeping in a basement apartment, Jarvis was one of the first people I met, you know, when I was a postdoc at Harvard. And I think our friendship really helped me think about how to be a builder in Black studies, how to do public programs, how to think about ways that we could create channels for students to do their work. So that's what it means to me, at least right now. And he's my son's godfather, so that, oh, thank you. That was great. You know, I trust him, you know, because he's a trustworthy cat, and he loves our people quite deeply. And I knew that besides myself, that was the sort of model I wanted for my son.
Yeah. First, I want to say, you know, I'm really excited to be here to have this conversation. Looking forward to what comes of it. But I have to thank, you know, yourself, Diamond, but also in Zenzele for that beautiful kind of, you know, memory to kind of ground us. I don't think we had talked much about, maybe I'm sure we talked about it when we were at that seminar, Black Studies and Education Research, but it's just really beautiful to hear how it's impacted, you know, you all's own thinking around the work that you're doing as scholars. Because it's really an extension of a conversation that we've been having since we kind of arrived here, right? When I got here as a postdoc, expecting to be a postdoc and then leave. And then, you know, 7 years later, here we are. But, you know, really my journey coming into Black Studies has really been, you know, kind of similar. It wasn't necessarily a trajectory that was planned out. I really feel like Black Studies, when I was an undergraduate student at UC Berkeley, I was a business major, believe it or not, you know, studying, you know, finance and accounting and things like that. But I always took these African American studies courses in part because a lot of the friends that I had on campus at UC Berkeley said, you need to take this class with this professor, you need to take this class with that professor. Even as they were all majoring in different things, they recognized very early on that, well, they introduced me to, you know, though I kind of knew it, but they emphasized the point that our education was about more than just going and getting a job, right? And, you know, I was a business major and took lots of African American studies courses, and one in particular by African American woman historian on African American history in the early 20th century really kind of pulled me in to the idea of what being a professor actually was, that it was more than just teaching classes, but that Black studies was about producing knowledge that was not only descriptive of Black life, but it was also corrective, right? Of so many of the distorted scripts that circulate and that constrain how Black folks are represented in the world and also how they experience the world, right? So Black studies is really, you know, it's three parts to it, right? It's not just about writing about Black people's lives, but it's about, you know, writing about Black life and culture with more nuance, clarity, and beauty than what's kind of represented in the world around us, but also about correcting this, you know, these centuries of scripts that continue to kind of constrain how the world sees Black folks, but also is prescriptive, right? Prescribing methods for pursuing more justice and more freedom for all of humanity, especially Black folks, right? And especially those most vulnerable among us. And so Black studies is that, and it emerges from the kind of Black student movement in the 1960s where, you know, we were able to get degrees in African American studies, Black studies, Africana studies because of students who demanded it in the 1960s. But it's something that precedes that, right? It's a mode of kind of producing knowledge about human experience that is rooted in Black life and culture, because there are things that can be known from the Black experience that can't be known from any other experience. And I think that it's important to kind of talk about that kind of history of Black studies as well, which, you know, the history of education that we talk about all the time, right? That we talk about all the time is, you know, reminds us of.
Yeah, I mean, you got me thinking about the pit school, brother, which I first found through a fugitive pedagogy. And for those of you who don't know, the pit schools were these spaces in the ground, essentially, that enslaved people dug to be able to teach one another to read by candlelight at night. And so I'm an eco-critic, which means that I write about Black people's relationship to the environment. I write about our nature poetry. And in reading Jarvis's book, Fugitive Pedagogy, and thinking about Black people literally digging these holes in the ground with versions of the Bible to teach themselves another script, right? A Bible that they were interpreting over and against the dominant discourse of the day. Seeing those kind of lived practices, I think it just did something to me that was transformative, right? Thinking about Phyllis Wheatley here in Massachusetts and the trial of policymakers, right, of scholars who were sent there to essentially prove that there was no way that a Black person could have produced a work of literature, right? In the 18th century, that was the tradition I was in, right? It wasn't just about, I mean, I love a good Black History Month calendar, but it wasn't just that, right? That's how I understood it, that it was a series of facts about inventions, right? And interventions into the way Black people had been described. But it wasn't my sense until I really was steeped in the tradition in undergrad that, oh yeah, we're trying to change the way narrative itself, right, is constructed in human society, the way we think about history itself, poetry itself, as Alan Grossman would put it, as the enemy of human forgetfulness. What do Black people demand we remember, right? One thing is how we got here, right? Hortense Spillers would say that's part of anti-Blackness, the hatred that Black people show up in space and remind people that slavery happened, and that we can't let it go. And so, yeah, I think our friendship, one, it's always opening windows for me into my own research. And it's always reminded me that this is about living Black people, right? I think it can be very easy to get lost in the books and abstract theory and say, well, I produced this 600-page work of critically reviewed literature, all the scholars love it, and it has nothing to do with the babies, right? With the children, who, as June Jordan always reminds me too, she's my friend like Jarvis, she's just not here with us in the flesh, right? She reminds me that it starts with the children, because before she started Poetry for the People at Berkeley in the 90s, right, she started Voice of the Children in 1974 in Brooklyn at the Church of the Open Door for Black and Puerto Rican kids every Sunday morning, right? She was in there to listen to their poetry, and she had a list of rules. Adults couldn't even really talk. You couldn't interrupt the kids and ask them questions about their poetry, right? Because she said that is the imposition of a pedagogical mode that we outright deny in this space. You will not destroy our children at this Saturday school the way they are destroyed at the schools outside of here, right? Reading that kind of work, I thought, okay, well, I'm not even up here to be James Brown for 45 minutes, which is what I thought being a professor was, right? That was some of what I saw modeled before me. And I realized it was something much deeper, but I had to dive back into the books to get there.
I think this idea of models is just so important in situating this in a longer history. And I like that there's this sort of intergenerational piece that you're bringing up, your connection to June Jordan, right? The friendship that Zenzele and I saw between you all, right? Those were pivotal moments in our development as scholars and thinkers. And so my next question has to do more so with you all's journeys as friends. And to follow this point, I want to ask, are there any pivotal moments in your journey as friends and thought partners that have shaped your thinking on the matter of Black study?
Yeah. Well, I think picking up on this kind of theme of it being this kind of intergenerational process or this continuum of consciousness, right, which we've talked about, before. It's, I think, to this question of pivotal moments, very early on when we first met as postdocs, it was maybe 2 years before the kind of 50th anniversary of Black Studies, right? Yeah. 50th anniversary of the kind of formal establishment of Black Studies departments, right? So we arrived here as postdocs at Harvard in 2016. Some of the first Black Studies departments were founded in 1968, right? And so oftentimes coming together and talking and commiserating about how awful Harvard was when we were postdocs, and perhaps, in some ways it still is. We were often. I'm just serious. The two of us
tenure and wilded out. Keep going.
Would like kind of hang out and talk about like why we really got into this work to do what it is that we were doing. And there's a number of things early on that we kind of connected over, right? It was not just that we both had this kind of grounding in this, training or experience in Black studies, both as undergrads and even in terms of like the way that we were trained in terms of graduate school, but also even before that, right? When we talked about our early education, I went to an all-Black parochial school in Compton where every morning began by singing "Lift Every Voice and Sing" and reciting poetry by Black scholars. And Josh was like, "What? That's crazy. I went to the modern school in New York." We used to do the same thing. Right? And of course, folks that are not familiar with the modern school, right? If you're familiar with "Lift Every Voice and Sing" and the Black National Anthem, the modern school was, I probably should let you talk about this, but it was created by James Weldon Johnson's, his niece, right? So even the creation of that school that Josh attended, where he was also singing this same song, that's this, connected to this Black intellectual tradition that I was also introduced to as a child in Compton every day of my life in school, was like forced us to start thinking very deeply about this tradition, but also inherit this idea of inheriting the tradition that we benefited so much from. And we were going back and forth. We should kind of prepare for like the 50th anniversary. Like we should do something. We should kind of do a special issue or put together an edited collection of keywords in Black studies. There were all sorts of iterations of it, but we decided that we wanted to do a special issue for Souls to commemorate the 50th anniversary that would have writings by an intergenerational group of scholars, both kind of junior scholars, grad students, but also very, very senior scholars. We were like, we should interview Sylvia Wynter to do this because we had talked a lot about Sylvia Wynter's work every day and it being like all the time and it being very important for us. And we wrote her a letter, and then it was like we're trying to do something to commemorate the milestone 50th anniversary of Black Studies, and she doesn't use computers and things like that, but we were able to track down one of her former students. Sylvia Wynter is in her 90s now, and I won't get into it, but a very important scholar, but surprisingly, she's got a phone call out of the blue, right? And she's like, "Oh yeah, this is wonderful what you're doing." And then she invites us to fly to Austin, just outside of Austin, Texas, to actually sit with her for 2 days and to talk with her. And I feel like that was a very, a very, very pivotal point in our kind of both friendship, but also how we understood the stakes of the work that we were doing, right? Would you say that?
I would say that too. I mean, look, man, we didn't practice any of this. I think there's something too. I'm gonna just speak to you, man. There's something too about seeing Jarvis's comportment around elders that I appreciate, because I don't think you really know somebody until you see them around elders and around children, right? And when I've seen Jarvis in those spaces, it's not just his tenderness, but his deep understanding. Like, it seems like he's almost in his 90s in that moment. Like it was.
Now you couldn't up.
I'm getting there. Like Professor Wynter, it was clear that she just recognized him and trusted him. And this sister ordered us pizza and salads 2 days in a row, and she sat with us for over 4 hours each day. I mean, I just had hours and hours of recordings with her, and she talked about coming here from Jamaica in disbelief, is what she said. She said, "I cannot believe what Black Americans had survived," right? And she left us with charges, after that second day, right? There were things we had to come back here and do. And I'll always remember that for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
That we went and visited this sister and that she welcomed us. Sylvia Wynter, more than any living writer, has shaped the way I think about scholarship and its stakes, right? I teach NHI every time I enter a classroom. I don't care what the theme of the class is, I'll make it fit. I taught a nature poetry workshop and I taught NHI.
Yeah.
And I said, we got to think about environmental studies and Black studies and its relationship and the pseudoscience of the LAPD. We did a whole thing, right? It was great.
Yeah.
And it just taught me something about this brother, but also his capacious vision and what it meant to really do this work in real time, which is that we had to reach every community of us. Right? We had to reach the elders. We had to speak to them. We had to say, Black studies, this foundation you laid, because that's what we forget. Before 1968 and 1967, Sonia Sanchez and Amiri Baraka were teaching on campus at San Francisco State, right? And Sylvia Wynter, she was reminding me as a poet, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot, like we're both poets. I have to come back to that sensibility. I can't do the thing I like to do where I hide and stand behind the PhD. Like I was a poet first. Right, and she brings you, just like she was a dancer first, and a playwright first, and a novelist, in addition to being a scholar. So she made room for us to be everything, and I think in our friendship, we tried to model the same.
Yeah.
That is actually profound, and this is actually my first time hearing this full story about Wynter. But just hearing, because I read Wynter's work, but I just hear another sort of layer of her life and her interaction with you all. That is very important as a model. And I see you all in many ways sort of modeling that sort of behavior for the next generation of scholars coming up, which is very important. And so I think we got a good sense of how friendship shows up in your lives as you traverse going from graduate school to life as professors and thinkers and lovers and doers. But I'm curious a little bit more about how this theme shows up in your books. So my next question is, how does this tradition of friendship and Black study show up in your new books? And what role has your friendship played in the development of your scholarship up till this point?
Yeah.
I got something quick on this.
Okay.
I don't think Jarvis even knows this, man. They had me rewrite this book 3 times, right?
I do know that.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's because they said it was too academic. And I
Yeah.
was like, which one is it? Do you want me because of the cachet of the university, or should I throw away the PhD and y'all still will pay me to write this book, right? And it was through talking to Jarvis about school clothes that I realized I needed to go talk to my friends, right? That the archive didn't really exist to write the kind of book around spoken word that I needed to write. So I went on Facebook Messenger and I wrote a note to Saul Williams. And I said, look, I know it's been 10 years since you saw me. He spoke to me at a youth poetry slam, many years ago. And I was wondering if I could interview you for this book, right? And this was in 2020, it's during the very height of the pandemic. And Saul Williams got on Zoom with me, right? With his son home from NYU, his son's ballet dancer. And we were just talking about kids, and my wife Pam's pregnant at the time, and our beautiful son, August Galileo. And it was just an incredible experience calling Saul, calling Sandra Marie Estevez, calling Lauren Whitehead, right? And talking to these people about their deep love for this art form. And I wouldn't have thought about that without Jarvis's vision of the collective memoir, right? That really struck me. And also just seeing him do book events. I was like, how come at every book event, this brother is talking to one of his teachers from his life, right? He's like, oh yeah, I'm in LA right now with my 4th grade teacher. I said, how do you even know your 4th grade teacher? To be able to call her up and and she remembers you, and y'all doing book events, and it just hit me that this model I had inherited, because there are many kinds of traditions, right? I'd also inherited a model during grad school at Princeton of, the scholar is someone who sits in a library for 12 hours by themselves and doesn't talk to anybody, right? That's what I was taught it meant to be rigorous, right? And instead, I had to open myself up back to the truer model we knew at the modern school, right? As a little boy. I didn't even know the Star Spangled Banner until I was 5, 6 years old, right? To me, the national anthem is Lift Every Voice and Sing, and that's because I heard my older sister singing it, right? I heard my cousins singing it. I heard my friends singing it. It was a collective endeavor that brought me into the tradition. So I had to return to that to write this book, or it would have been 5 or 6 times they had me rewriting it, I had to lean on our folks, and they pulled me through to the end of this thing.
Yeah. There's so many things that came to mind when you asked that question, both in terms of how I became more, one, like thinking with kind of Josh and the work that he's been doing, in terms of Black literary criticism, I think really shows up in this particular text, because a lot of the sources that I'm engaging with are, it's Black autobiography, some of it is, Black poetry, but also the way that some of the kind of close reading practices that I do with archival material is definitely informed by my friendship with Josh, but also a number of other scholars who are in English and do literary criticism. So there's that component to how like our friendship has shaped the way that I think about producing historical scholarship, and also the kinds of sources that I seek out to try to offer a kind of a more expansive vision of the heritage of Black education that attends to Black writing as one of the kind of important material kind of artifacts of the evidence of this Black educational tradition that I'm actually writing about and trying to talk about beyond just school structures and things like that, right? There's no way for us to understand the foundations of Black education without taking seriously the slave narratives, right? And I think reading some of your work helped me think about the relationship between the Black literary tradition and the Black educational tradition, right? How do we make sense of Black literature without taking seriously the history of education? For whatever reason, scholars have been not attending to that for quite some time, right? But I think our conversations between one another has helped me to appreciate that in a new way. But also this question about, I do, I was really blessed to have teachers who took an approach to kind of educating Black children that was not just about, students in the seats that I'm supposed to teach something to, and actually earlier today I just made a video, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. I made a video for my high school English teacher because it's her 80th birthday. And her daughter reached out to some of her former students to put together videos for her birthday celebration. She also appears in the book because I interviewed some of my former Black teachers about their early educational experiences to add their voices to the historical record of Black students as I add my own voice to that kind of collective witnessing. But one of the things she would always say is that my goal here is to be a friend to your mind, right? Obviously building on Morrison.
I love it.
Right, yeah, this is coming from Toni
amazing.
Morrison. I didn't realize that that's where it was coming from when I was a high school student and when she would always say that. But I think, whether she explicitly said that or not, she was modeling a very important pedagogical tradition in Black studies in saying that and in offering me that language. But that certainly shows up and I kind of tease that out in some of the narratives, right? One of the very early narratives in the book is about, students traveling together in New York City in the kind of antebellum era, trying to pursue educational opportunities together. These are three teenage students from New York City trying to seek out more opportunities and meeting kind of anti-Black aggression and violence every step of the way. But taking seriously what that journey must have been like for them to do that together, right? And all of these students, right, whose voices are cobbled together in this book, I'm trying to say, right, reflect a collective experience that's about pursuing a new way of being in relationship with one another, but also the world that I think we should be striving for in friendship. Yeah.
And one of the points you bring up, interestingly enough, Zenzele and I actually talked about that Morrison quote the other day as we were preparing for today's event.
Wow.
This concept of being a friend of the mind. So just hearing it reiterated tonight is one special, but just speaks to how the tradition finds us in different ways, right? Without us even seeking it, we're a part of it. And so we will close out this sort of closing conversation with our authors by offering each of the authors an individual time to respond to this final question, right? We heard a little bit about their own trajectories, right? How they see themselves situated within this longer tradition of Black studies and Black study, right? And so I have a question about the autobiographical ties to their works, right? So I'll ask each of the authors this question. So School Clothes and Spoken Word are about education and are in many ways autobiographical, that is reflecting each of your stories. Would you mind sharing with our audience how your personal experience in education, both as a student and educator, shapes what readers will find in your books?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. You're making me think about the philosopher Bernard Stiegler, right, who essentially says that the home is our first education. And I used to improvise sermons when I was 4 years old.
Of course you did.
Yeah. But I mean like whole sermons. Like I come home from church. It would be, let me cook. I'll come home from church and it was like 25 minutes of just off the top of the day. And I would do the whole thing. I'd be like, good morning, saints. Today's lesson is coming from the book of Jonah. And I would do a whole thing. And my whole family, they would clap. They would amen. They made it seem like it was the most normal thing in the world. And it really took until I got to like middle school, high school for me to know that that was kind of strange because our family culture was so tight-knit. And my parents really love Black people. Like it's fascinating. All my children's books, you know, George Washington Carver, Lewis H. Latimer, Mary McLeod Bethune, Harriet Tubman, I was just so steeped in it. And they were very serious about the idea that I had a voice. And my teachers, you know, almost none of whom were Black in my elementary school in Yonkers, once I left the modern school, they could not tell me certain things about myself without seeing my mom and dad. They would show right up and it would be a problem, right? My dad is a Marine. He's like model handsome, like he would get free donuts at Dunkin' Donuts, but he'll give you like a stern stare. And he would do that to my teachers. And my mom, she's from the South Bronx, so you know the deal, right? And they loved me so deeply, it changed the way that I thought about what poetry was for, right? I realized that I needed to reflect the love I saw at home in the craft itself and also with the way I shared with audiences. I had to take it really seriously when someone came out to see me at a poetry slam or came to see me at a show because both of my parents would work 8 to 10 hour shifts at the post office. It's a very big deal to take your time off to listen to a Black man read some poetry, right? About his own life and circumstance. So that's in the book. The fact that the first poetry slam I ever saw was in a public library where my mother took me on a Saturday morning and she made me get up and go because I had terrible stage fright, and she said gifts are meant to be given because she just speaks in moral philosophy like that. And she helped me believe that I could speak in public and not disintegrate, right? That I could come out on the other end alive. So I'm just always carrying her lessons and my father's lessons around with me, and it informs not just this book, but all my scholarship.
Yeah. This is so my journey to even starting to study the history of Black education was really, came from the fact that there was this huge tension, right? When I was in college, folks expected me to be able to relate to all of the contemporary scholarship about Black student underachievement, the school to prison pipeline. I was like, I went to high achieving Black schools in Compton my entire life. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, this does not resonate with what I know to be the kind of experience of Black folks in education. But then when I got to graduate school, I read a book called Their Highest Potential, which you're very familiar with. Anyone who's taken a class with me will be very familiar with that book, about a high achieving Black school in, Jim Crow, North Carolina, by Vanessa Siddle Walker. And I was like, wow, this is interesting that my experience at the school that I attended in Compton, from preschool to 8th grade, and then elements of the public high school that I attended as well, resonate more deeply with this historical narrative about this high achieving Black school and the school culture there than any of this other contemporary scholarship that I'm being expected to kind of relate to. And then that led me down a road of trying to study this tradition that really we're talking about here, that led to questions about Black teachers, right? And for my first book, Fugitive Pedagogy, the last chapter is called The Black Student as Witness, where I started to I was suspicious of the way Black teachers were represented in traditional archival sources, because I'm like, these are records that are reflecting how they're projecting themselves to white school authorities. I can't trust that because I've seen how Black people navigate power and institutions in particular ways, in part because I was a student of Black teachers my entire life, right? And so this is when I was, I don't talk about my own experience in Fugitive Pedagogy, but when I was reviewing the manuscript, and actually Josh's kind of dissertation advisor, Imani Perry, who's now a good friend of mine, read the manuscript, and we've become good friends over the years too, which is also just interesting thinking about that story of friendship there. She was like, don't underestimate your experience and how it informs how you look in the historical record and how you name absences, because of what you know as a Black person who's navigated these kinds of contexts. And so I took that very seriously. And so this idea of the Black student as witness really kind of grows out of that last chapter of my first book, where I was writing about Black students in the historical record and what they saw their teachers do. And I decided that I wanted to kind of put together a book, about Black student witnessing across the 19th and 20th century, because I recognize the absence of student perspectives in the historical record, or in the historical scholarship written about Black education. And so that's what this book is. It's really a cobbling together of my experiences, my teachers' experiences, right? And any kind of piece of historical materials I could find where Black student voices appear, to put them all together and say, what can we learn from listening to this chorus of Black students? Even if it's not a linear narrative, there are all these sorts of themes that emerge throughout that I wanted to write about. And I was able to pick up on some of the themes in part because of my own experience as a Black student and really leaning into that. And that's something that Black studies, I think, I'm lucky that I was able to kind of get that kind of training that gave me permission to do that, because obviously there's lots of disciplinary fields that would kind of look down upon that, right? But I know better, and so I operate differently, right? But that's how my own personal experience really came to inform this project, but also is, in the background of the first book as well, even if it's not explicitly on the page.
So thank you both for providing insight, us a window into your lives, right? Your personal development, right? But also how your personal lives shape your trajectories, both as educators and writers. And I hope the audience, like myself, feels as though they've learned something new today. I have known them for going on 4 years now. And I just keep learning from them each time I talk with them. So I hope you all enjoyed this discussion. And I hope you have some questions prepared as we transition to our question and answer section. That will be led by Diamond Arrington of the Harvard Graduate School of Education's Black Student Union. I will hand it over to Diamond, who will moderate our Q&A. We have folks who are joining in live on Zoom as well as a live audience. Diamond has a microphone up here that she will offer to folks in person that have questions, and then we'll be monitoring the chat on Zoom, and then Diamond will also be asking those questions as they're directed to her cell phone. So Diamond, please.
That's a lot. Okay, a round of applause for this. That's wild. So we got a Zoom questions. Hey, Diamond, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you all? I have thoroughly enjoyed this. I don't know about you all. I have a friend who's watching on Zoom. So sorry, I forgot. I have a friend who's watching on Zoom, and he said he has never heard Black academics talk about friendship, and this was very healing for him. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. Any questions from the audience? Don't all speak at once. Yes, sir.
Pass her the mic. You have to hand me the mic.
I got to hand it to you.
That's a lot of work.
That's all right, Doc.
Question for Dr. Bennett. When you have a poem that you've written for the stage and you want to include it in an anthology or vice versa, what do you change when moving it from stage to page or vice versa?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Nothing, usually. I mean, in part now, so I appreciate that Jarvis brought in the modern school so early. I think I'm just steeped in a tradition where if the poem doesn't sound good out loud, you just don't write it that way. Like you tweak it until it does. And I say this because, this is the argument of the book, that all spoken word doesn't have to be memorized, right? The idea is just that the poem is written with a social occasion in mind, right? You've written it to be read to other people. So for me, I think that's just, and I wear that bias, openly, right? Is that with my students in workshop, I'm like, do you ever want to read this to somebody? Like, or is this to be read privately? Because that's cool too, but that's not exactly what we're doing here necessarily, right? We're here to share, and we're here to create open space for poetry in a nation where at least it's said that we're hostile to it. I don't really know that I buy that. I think, especially in Black communities, poetry is ubiquitous. It's definitely not dead. It's in Black worship spaces. It's in Black schools. It's at Black funerals, right? And Black weddings. My son was born, we played Coltrane in the room, and I read him poetry every single day, right? And I don't think that's just because I'm a poet. It's because I'm someone who loves language, right? And I think poetry is language at its most distilled. So I try to toe that tightrope sometimes, especially when I'm at work. But when I'm at home, it's got to sound beautiful when you give it to the air. great question.
Question over here. It's for the video.
So to the both of you, throughout your discussion, you used the term tradition, like quite a bit actually. So, but the Academy has its own traditions. So I'm curious as to how you were able to compel the Academy to accept, embrace, and celebrate a tradition that is different from their own.
Have we been able to do that?
I don't know that we've achieved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I was going to double check with you before we got. Okay, go ahead, brother. You got it.
Yeah.
You got that.
That's and I'm not necessarily So in terms of the Black studies, for in many ways, so this is part of it. It's like it becomes institutionalized, right, in the late 1960s, because Black and on the heels of the Civil Rights movement, kind of Black folks are disillusioned with the immediate backlash and the kinds of things that are happening in the political context. And Black students are going to college at a kind of increased rates, and particularly at historically white institutions, but also demands for Black studies also happen at HBCUs as well. And you get the kind of institutionalization of Black studies, but the reality is that for us up until that point, it's not that Black folks weren't thinking systematically and trying to study Black experiences and to document it and to write about it, but there was a kind of refusal to look at it and acknowledge it as legitimate knowledge, right? Okay. Whether this is folks even that have PhDs, whether this is Du Bois, right? If we think about Du Bois's experience, right? The reality is that folks like Du Bois and Woodson, we read them now, or Anna Julia Cooper read them now, but if they were not able to have graduate students and to train the next generation of scholars, at least not in the academy, even though there were Black folks who continued to operate in that tradition and take up their work despite being kind of pushed to the margins of the kind of academic enterprise that is the university, if you will. And so even as it becomes institutionalized, though, it continues to be under assault, and we know that African American studies continues to be under assault, especially today, right? From political figures and folks who are attacking, for instance, AP African American Studies, a course that we both helped develop with a friend of ours, Brandy Waters, who also has a PhD in African American Studies, who's the person that was the director of the course that invited us to kind of come and work with her to build that course, right? And so we see that the tradition that we're operating in the kind of the work that we're doing as scholars, in certain places it's taken up, but we still hear little kinds of, there are constantly, small jabs, sometimes not so small, right, that we're seeing in the current moment where Black knowledge and Black intellectual production continues to be under assault. That's a very long history, but part of the tradition is being vigilant of that and knowing that that's part of the work that we have to do in not just responding to that, but being aware that the kind of knowledge that's accepted as the legitimate knowledge has historically been part of the problem, right? Has historically been part of the scripts that have defined Black folks as a subgenre of the human species, right? When we think about all of the different disciplines that continue to kind of be, to kind of shaping the kind of academic project in the context of the university. So that tension is absolutely still there, even though some of us may, in this contemporary moment, have been able to kind of access these spaces to utilize the resources to expand on the work of this tradition. But that is something that continues to be under attack.
Yeah. I mean, I guess briefly on that, I would say sometimes you do it through subterfuge, right? Like, I'll teach a contemporary American poetry course, and just everybody on the syllabus might happen to be Black. And that's just what we're gonna read. And I'm not changing the name of the course. That's what it's called, right? That's what it's called in the registrar's office. And my students seem to appreciate it. I mean, especially when I teach something like Lift Every Voice and Sing, they're astonished that a thing like the Black National Anthem exists and that they ostensibly went to the best schools in the country and have never heard of it, right? And this is even when I have predominantly non-Black students. They're taken aback and seem to feel robbed, frankly, right? That they've never, one, had a Black teacher, many of them a Black educator, a Black professor stand in front of them and teach them anything. but they haven't been taught anything about African American literature, right? They might be taught Walt Whitman, but they won't be taught Lucille Clifton's memoir, Generations, that takes him up, right? Or June Jordan's essay on a people's poetry and how she's inspired by Whitman. But if we read Whitman, we're definitely reading Clifton and Jordan, right? We're putting him in the context of the people who've taken his legacy in a more radical direction, perhaps, than he ever could have imagined, right? And that's just how you do it. And the jabs, yeah, sometimes they're just outright. Like, oh, well, this isn't the, maybe next time we could teach this a little differently. Like, I don't think so. I don't foresee that. I think I'm probably gonna always teach my courses the way I want because it's my job, right? I don't wanna do the other thing, right? And if you want somebody to do the other thing, that's cool. But as for me and my house, right? I feel like I'm in the sanctuary, my name's Joshua, we gotta just do it. But that's really important to me. I take that very seriously, right, as Jarvis gestures toward, to fill in that gap in the education of our students, no matter where they come from, right? That's part of the tradition that we stand on.
I'm going to filter in one of our questions from our online audience. What has the codification of AVE through the creation of the Oxford Dictionary of African American English meant to you personally and the work you create?
So I guess the kind of recognition of African American vernacular English as something that should be taken seriously. I mean, I don't know that I necessarily paid much attention to whether or not it was accepted there, but I didn't know that. But I think, it was always accepted.
I'm glad you said it first.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but I appreciate the question, especially because, as someone who, luckily I had Black teachers who helped me understand that the way that my kind of like spoken voice, at times how to take the kind of resources that comes with kind of Black ways of saying, if you will, might inform my writing and my thinking in very important ways, and it not be kind of diminished, even as I was also taught to understand how to kind of navigate certain kind of dynamics and requirements within the context of like American education, right? And ideas around kind of, standard English, if you will, for whatever that means, because I had Black teachers who were invested in making sure that I held on to the resources that came with African American vernacular English, Black English, Ebonics, whatever folks want to call it. That there's a lot, that can be captured in the way that Black folks say things. And I actually kind of toy with that and play with it in certain ways in my writing, and certainly, folks like Josh do as well. So the short answer is that I wasn't unaware that they did that, but it was always something that I was taught to understand was a kind of resource in how we kind of express ourselves and how we think and how we, and that it's also rule governed, right? That there's actually a system to it, even though people can kind of like try to mock it as though there is no, there's no structure or there's no integrity to the way that Black folks think and speak. But we know that that's not the case long before any kind of, dictionary acknowledged it.
Yeah, that's right. When I teach my contemporary American poetry class, I teach James Baldwin's essay, "If Black English Isn't a Language, then tell me what is." Yeah, and he talks about being in Britain, when you open your mouth, you put your business on the street, right? That you can sort of tell someone's class by accent, and also that when Black English is, when teachers in American schools try to discipline Black English out of their students, right? What they're refusing is an entire worldview, right? There's a language that you feel at home in, the language your mama speaks to you in. And also Fred Moten talks about this. If you talk about a whole mess of greens, a whole mess is a unit of measurement, right? There's a certain precision to the way we speak, right? There are certain objects that make up Black lexicon and give it life.
Yeah.
And why would I want to dispose of that? In exchange for what?
Exactly.
I'm okay. Right? We alive over here.
And if we look to so many of the important kind of like, all the kind of widely celebrated Black literature, or even the kind of widely celebrated Black political figures, like how do we celebrate and take seriously someone like, Jesse Jackson or, or Martin Luther King Jr. or Maya Angelou, if we're going to kind of, there's no way to fully appreciate the kind of literary contributions and the cultural contributions without taking seriously the language that kind of made those contributions, possible. And it's fascinating, like, my 10th grade English teacher, who I'm really thankful that I had, actually introduced us to, Geneva Smitherman's Talking and Testifying as a part of helping us understand what it was that we were doing and how our way of speaking could be a resource, even as we were working and a bridge to kind of learning the lessons that we were supposed to be learning in our English class. And I struggled. I actually struggled writing was not my strong suit in high school until I had, got teachers like that particular educator who helped us think about our relationship to writing and to speaking, and to be aware of that, to be able to kind of know the resources that we had and how it might add to other things that we could take up and learn in the context of schools. Not to kind of demean or diminish the way that folks spoke at home, at church, and community, because that would be cutting off so much important knowledge that we had as thinkers that we brought to the classroom.
That's great.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your friendship and how it's resourced you and living in the anti-Black world, both the expressions of anti-Blackness and the internalization of it?
Yeah, I mean, when I have a serious problem, I call Jarvis. And he knows this. I called him 2 days ago because it got wild out here for a second, right? And I was like, all right, well, time to call Jarvis. I called him right up. And my wife understands. She's like, all right, babe, go do your thing, right? I'll be kicking it in here with little man, and we'll talk it over when you get back. And some of that is that this brother is very responsible, but some of it too is that when you're friends with somebody for a while, they can understand your thought patterns, I think, and they can talk to you in a language you recognize. I'll also say this too, and we definitely didn't go over this part in advance. Jarvis is one of my first friends I've ever had that when things are my fault, he tells me it's my fault.
Absolutely.
And I know, I'm speaking truth right now. Absolutely. And I distinctly remember the first time you did this, man. We were at Earl's. And I wanted to fight this brother, physically fight him. I was like, I'm heartbroken right now, and you're telling me it's my fault.
So, yeah, that's
and
wrong.
it took me 48 hours. I had to go, I was like, man, this is my fault. And it took all that time for it to hit me. And I realized I didn't really have a lot of boys like that in my life who would be like, oh, nah, man, you messed that up. Like, what did you expect that person to do? And I'm sorry you're hurting, and I'm here with you, and we can have these drinks and eat dinner and then go home.
Yeah, but you were wrong.
Yeah, thank you, brother. I admitted that first. See, now we got him charged up. We can't do a part two. We're gonna run with this, right? But that's important, right? I think we have a lot of talk about accountability in our present discourse, but having somebody, as Dr. Cornel West would say, someone who loves you enough to tell you the truth, that's something very distinct, and that can look all kind of ways. And if someone doesn't know you well, it's hard to do that and not like really deeply wound you, right? So it stung for a second, but I could recognize his truth in part because of the source. I was like, I don't think Jarvis would lie about that, and if he's saying something like that, I need to really look at the situation with new eyes. And so in that way, it's been an armor, right? It's helped me to see myself in a world that often does not and cannot see me, right? It's not able to, but I don't really need that because I have, I got Jarvis, I got my wife, I have my family, I'm set, right? And that's a big deal. It's hard to feel that way, and it took me a long time, but I'm glad I got there.
Yeah, and to that second part about the kind of internalization of stuff is that I think operating in the academies, we're subjecting our ideas to kind of external scrutiny, anonymous scrutiny. We're navigating spaces where the way that we're thinking about the work that we're doing is not the norm and is in many ways kind of like, at odds with the kind of standard way of doing some of this work. And it's kind of hard not to question what it is that you're doing at certain times, right? Because everyone around you is saying, no, it needs to be done in this way. And you're like, but I feel like I know another way based on the people that I'm writing about, the tradition that I'm writing about, that you know nothing about, but I'm having to constantly be in contact and do that translation work to other people that can kind of cast doubt on the work. And and sometimes I can, as someone who likes to kind of take criticism seriously, right? Sometimes I'll be like, well, maybe there isn't, and then Josh will be like, don't do that. What do you mean? Like, no, they don't know what this. How are you gonna, don't do that to yourself. You know the people who will tell you if you were saying something crazy, if this was wrong, so long as you're running it through the folks who actually know what the hell you're talking about, and not necessarily the folks that may be your colleagues who are expected to evaluate your work and decide whether or not you are worthy of whatever the things that they're supposed to be evaluating you for. you have to be able to think outside of that. We have to remind each other of it because we are navigating these spaces. And it can be easy to be socialized in a way to internalize the kind of protocols and the kind of ways of kind of assessing work that are the norms here, even though we know we're operating in a different tradition. And we have to be mindful of that. And I feel like that's one of the ways that our friendship has been important for holding us accountable in a particular way, right? And accountable to the work in that way, and not necessarily just to the space, right? So that we can continue to be in but not of a place that we know is not necessarily built for us in the work that we're trying to do.
That's right.
Can we just give one more round of applause for our authors? And shout out to all of you all for your amazing questions, and to our virtual audience. We did have a few questions that we were unable to get to, but we will give them to the authors, I promise. And there will be time for you to talk to them after this.
Yeah.
But now I'm gonna invite Devin up to the podium just to share a few words that he gathered from this, and to also encourage our authors to read a portion of their
Appreciate
books.
you, man. Your dunks are fly, too. I didn't even know.
Thank you, Diamond. I know y'all didn't come here to hear me talk, so I'm gonna be brief. Dr. Givens, Dr. Bennett, I think I was left with a couple of things. Sorry, I didn't say this. My name is Devin Morris. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Teachers Lounge. I'll tell y'all a little bit more about us in a moment. I think I was left with reflections where you gave us little bits and pieces of both school clothes and spoken word, talking about how friendships have been a lever towards being builders of and building public forums on Black studies and ed research. This idea of friends sharing wisdom, experiences, and resources, what I would say is an we are all we got approach to survival and corrective pathways. Before I dive into some specific quotes, I thought it was important for me to note, Dr. Givens invited us here as members of the Teachers Lounge to support, and I've had the distinct pleasure and honor of listening to this brother speak on several occasions, preach, if you will, on several occasions. And members of our collective at the Teachers Lounge have spoken about countless instances of the impact of your presence and of your work. I didn't know Zenzele and Christian and Diamond before I came here, and then y'all put up an image on the screen, and I see an image of Gary Mitchell and Rebecca, and I send them texts. Gary is he and his wife, longtime members of the Teachers Lounge, educators of color, a part of our collective, and Rebecca is the mother of a classmate of my daughter's. And I had this reminder that we are so deeply, deeply connected to our individual and collective journeys and success, and the success of our students and colleagues. There are so few of us educators of color in any given institution. And so it takes events like this, and we're so appreciative of events like this, to continue to fill our cups so that we can turn around and continue to fill the cups of our students. So thank you to the team for putting this together. And so thinking back to this end, Josh, you named poetry as the enemy of human forgetfulness. And Jarvis, both of your texts talk about witnessing both Black teachers and Black students. And Joshua, you left us with this quote that said, "I don't think you really know someone until you see them around elders and students." And something that we are doing with our work at the Teachers Lounge is pushing on recruitment and retention strategies and thinking about, as we like to push leaders on, we don't care about your resume or what adults you can get to serve as a reference. What are students and families saying about your impact on our babies? And so to this end, I think the thing that I want to carry forward, based on what you both have left us with, is how were you a friend to their mind? But I want to push us, because I think you were both talking about students. But the reality is that moments like these are a clear sign and reflection of the impact that we can have on each other's minds through these friendships. And I think you both have pushed us on this idea of being a friend to someone's mind means also knowing their hearts. It means speaking truths, even in moments of difficulty. And I just look out in this room as you think to yourselves about those who you came with, those who are not seated next to you today, who should have been here and who would love to take part in opportunities like this, is how can we be authentic friends to each other's minds? And so I thank you both for your words, and I'm going to turn things over to you to leave us with some closing excerpts from your respective texts and encourage you all to take advantage of the gems that were dropped here today, not only through the spoken narratives, but also there are opportunities later to then purchase texts and read up on all three texts, not just the two that are being presented here today. But that was such a pleasure to learn of your work as well. So I'll leave you all with that.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Devin. That was beautiful, man. All right. Well, you talked about the babies, man. So I'll close with a passage about those first sleepless days when it was me at home with my son dancing around the living room. So his name, August Galileo, just a little bit of background. So August is a double entendre. It's August Wilson, but it's also Black August, right? That annual celebration of the life and legacy of George Jackson, but also the Haitian Revolution, the Underground Railroad, etc. And his middle name, Galileo, is both, some would say the father of modern physics, but also a speech that W.E.B. Du Bois gave at Fisk in 1908 called Galileo Galilei. And one of our first dates, Pam asked me, what was my favorite piece of writing? And I told her it was this speech. And she asked me to read it. This is on a date. And I said, okay, I read like the opening sentence. She said, keep going. And we ended up somehow reading this whole speech. And so when we found out he was on the way, we thought that's a perfect way to mark his entry into the world. Names are an incantation of a certain kind. August Galileo reminds us, and will hopefully remind our son, to have courage in the face of unthinkable odds, persistence in the midst of the seemingly impossible, an unflinching dedication to the wonder, respect for the essential drama of human life, and the ceremonies that make it worthwhile. The other big difference since August's arrival, aside from the new routine at sunrise, is that there are toys everywhere, many of which have names that are not to be found on the boxes we purchase them in. The wolf throne, his swing, the device, a gray baby sling, and the rattle snail, a rattle shaped just like a snail. This ever-expanding collective of objects makes it hard to walk through the living room, but a joy to be there. Once Mom comes downstairs, it's party time once again. We throw on a K-Tronada DJ set and dance until we are tired, falling to the couch in unison where we rest for a while. One of the great gifts of the Black expressive tradition is that it refuses the notion of human immortality, especially as it is often imagined in our secular modernity through private property or conquest, and yet gives you moments where you feel invincible, endless. We do not live forever, but we do live on. We live for the children. We engage in protracted struggle so that they might inherit a planet worthy of their loveliness. While I once understood this largely in the abstract, this sense of things now animates my days. I can't hear Coltrane without thinking of my boy arriving here on a Sunday night, hours before dawn. Recently, while looking through old records, I found a copy of Train's debut album with Atlantic, Giant Steps. It felt like a sign. Around the same time, I discovered Michael Harper's 1970 collection of poems, Dear John, Dear Coltrane. There's a poem there, Alone, that has been stuck in my head ever since I found it. A friend told me he'd risen above jazz. I leave him there. Reading Harper, I'm reminded that there's an unimpeachable beauty here in the spaces where many say there is nothing to be studied, nothing to be learned or celebrated. In those interstices, the cafe, the community center, the poetry circus in the desert, the bar, the construction site, the open mic, line by line, brick by brick, we are inaugurating new worlds. Every time we touch the stage, we are reaching out to one another. We are stepping out on trust into the darkness, that our dreaming might be the bridge between us.
Great. I had some trouble with the title of the book makes perfect sense to me, right? But when it took a little convincing with some of the folks on the editorial staff, and Josh and I had a number of conversations about this, because obviously the book is not about school clothes, but school clothes is a metaphor, right? About the kind of stories that cover Black students, both the ones that are projected onto them, but also how what I felt like I was seeing in the record about Black students trying to adorn themselves with new scripts, new stories, right? That's a part of the ceremony of education, if you will. But when I was in the archive doing research, I was like struck by all of these narratives in the kind of post-emancipation South with Black folks going to school for the first time, and the way that they talked about getting dressed to go to school. And it wasn't just about a kind of materialistic kind of idea about, wanting, there's some of that, right, that we can talk about, but in particular, I felt like there was something deeper that was very clearly there about folks who were trying to kind of refuse images that were projected onto them and present themselves and kind of adorn themselves in ways that projected an image about how they saw themselves in a world that didn't exist yet. And there are all kinds of stories, but I'll read one that comes up again in the conclusion when I talk about this theme of school clothes. Again, it comes up in the prologue, but then it returns in the conclusion. And this is the story of William Holtzclaw, who was a student in the post-Reconstruction South in Alabama. And this is a story about the kind of end of the school year, and the students are supposed to have these kind of white outfits, and him and his siblings, they don't have it. And so he writes about this experience. The next morning, William Holtzclaw and his two siblings woke up to white suits for all of them. He was in disbelief at his mother's resourcefulness. She cut up and repurposed the fabric from her only petticoat, a kind of layered undergarment worn beneath Victorian-style dresses to make them flare out at the bottom. She had to be meticulous, cutting the fabric just right to ensure there was enough to cover all three of her children. The petticoat was quite worn, so the fabric was loose. The children would have to be mindful of any big movements, lest they overextend the fabric and cause it to tear. Holtzclaw and his siblings had to adjust to these constraints. Recalling his anxiety about the clothes splitting, he shared that during the performance, quote, "We had to be very careful how we stooped in moving about the stage, lest there should be a general splitting and tearing with consequences we were afraid to imagine," end quote. Knowing this, they carried on with a kind of carefulness. Despite their fears, the clothes held up. It was a proud moment for their family. Holtzclaw's mother and father, both born under slave law, were not permitted to learn. For them, reading and writing would literally have been deemed criminal activity. Seeing their children stand on a platform and perform speeches they learned in school was something like watching a prayer come to life right before their eyes. Holtzclaw recalled, "We said our little pieces, and I suppose we looked about as well as the others. At least we thought so, and that was sufficient." In adorning their bodies with the white suits made by their mother in a pinch, these students were being covered by more than makeshift school clothes. The clothes represented their collective striving to bear new marks. This was a will to adorn that carried embedded meaning. The clothes Mrs. Holtzclaw stitched together from scraps of her undergarment were part and parcel of an act of covering her children in prayer, not just for the performative aspects of their culminating school event, but also to commemorate what was for her a new day begun. Her children's going to school was part of a broader quest for a ceremony to remake Black life in ways that defied or refused any remnants of the slave past. The proceedings of this school event were situated in the larger span of these students and their families' shared genealogy as Black people striving to live free and dignified lives. Going to school for these children, the first in their family to be born on the other side of slavery, was a part of Black people's experimentation with their dreams of freedom in the first decades after emancipation.
right, what such powerful readings, everyone. They definitely and certainly left an impression on myself. Hearing about his son, right? Hearing about this narrative of school clothes being stitched together, right? Just the ingenuity and creativity of Black people in our pursuit of learning. And so to close us out this evening, our authors will be heading downstairs soon to prepare for a book signing. Copies of their books will be sold in the gift shop across the courtyard in the Smith School. And as they make their way down, I will be inviting our partners up to offer a little bit about their programming, brief notes about their mission and organizations. But first, I would like to start by thanking GBH, our partners who helped live stream this event and help coordinate our online audience. But to start off our organizational notes, I would like to invite Diamond, who will speak about Harvard's Graduate School of Education and their Black Student Union, who will be followed up by Devin. And Diamond will then invite up Devin to share more about the Teachers Lounge. Diamond, thank you.
There you go. That's a picture of my family up there. There we go. So our Black Student Union, we are all about family. We are all about friendship. We're about discovering new, deep dives into literature, into artistic, educational values. And we get together and we just have a good time. In a space like Harvard, where sometimes Blackness is kind of erased or closed, we find time every Thursday to come together and spend time as a family. So if you are a current Hugsy student, or if you're just on Harvard's campus and you Black, come and visit us Thursday. We take you in. Sometimes we have food, sometimes we have fun. I want to thank our board who just works so effortlessly, our entire creative team. And it just has been a blessing to be a part of such a great family and deep friendships. So join us on Thursday, y'all. We'll be there. Devin, come on up.
There we go. Keep it real brief. So our bottom line is student well-being and academic success. And so we strive to drive unprecedented student outcomes by greatly diversifying the people, thoughts, and actions of the educational workforce, by recruiting, revitalizing, and retaining educators of color throughout the greater Boston area and beyond. And so we do that through a number of different ways. And so a number of those beautiful faces that you just saw on the last screen are a part of our collective as well. And so we do this through social and professional networking, professional development for educators of color across the greater Boston area. But we also realized we were simply putting a Band-Aid over a bullet wound if we were only creating spaces for educators of color and not actually driving change at the district and state level. And so we started to doing work supporting schools and districts around their equity-centered hiring and retention practices by uplifting the voices of members of our collective to be a part of those decision-making bodies in those spaces. I'm gonna keep it really brief and just direct you to these two QR codes where you can learn about a little bit more about the work that we do. And most notably, the last event of the year that we're gonna host is this educator prom. We like to say kids ain't the only ones who need to let their hair down and enjoy themselves a little bit. And so we have Educators of Color prom that's happening on May 20th. You are all invited. Come through, celebrate with us. It'll be a beautiful event. And with that, I'm gonna name that there are 3 of us here from the Teachers Lounge team if you would like to learn a little bit more about the work that we're doing and the folks that we serve. Thank you all.
So I'd just like to end again by thanking our sponsors, but also thanking all of you for coming out this evening in this iconic space to hear about 2 new books celebrating education, Black life, in the pursuit of freedom. Without further ado, I would like to close this evening and say thank you to you all for showing up for this very important event celebrating 2 important figures in my life and who will help bring quite necessary attention to the museum. So thank you all, and thank you all for joining us this evening.